Blackthorn Hall was the perfect stage for murder. Wealthy guests, champagne, velvet curtains, and secrets hidden behind elegant smiles. Then, at 11 o'clock, Sir Reginald Blackthorn was found dead inside his locked study, with a torn piece of blue silk in his hand. The police believed they knew the killer, but Hercule Poirot saw something they missed. Everyone in that house was acting. One was performing grief, one was hiding fear, and one was performing innocence. But when Poirot asked one simple question, the killer forgot their lines. The curtain rises. Chapter 1. The stage is set. Blackthorn Hall was the perfect stage for tragedy. Elegant, refined, and glowing beneath crystal chandeliers, it stood above the winter countryside, like a theatre built for people who had forgotten that audiences could sometimes become victims. Every guest had arrived with a role already prepared: the grieving widow, the devoted nephew, the loyal secretary, the charming family friend. Then, shortly after 11 o'clock, Sir Reginald Blackthorn was found dead in his locked study, one hand resting beside an overturned glass of champagne, and the other clutching a torn piece of blue silk. The police saw a simple explanation. Sir Reginald had been poisoned during dinner, and suspicion immediately fell upon the people who had reason to dislike him. But Hercule Poirot, standing beneath the study's velvet curtains while rain whispered against the windows, saw something different. He saw a performance. Someone in this theatre of wealth was playing the role of innocent. Someone else was playing the role of murderer. The curtain rises. The discovery had been made by Miss Eleanor Vane, Sir Reginald's private secretary. She had screamed when she entered the study, and her cry had brought nearly everyone running from the drawing room. Colonel Arthur Vale arrived first, followed by Lady Beatrice Blackthorn, Sir Reginald's young wife, and Julian Blackthorn, his nephew and heir. Behind them came Dr. Marcus Bell, the family physician, and Mrs. Clara Finch, the housekeeper, whose crisp, black uniform seemed almost theatrical against the polished mahogany doors. Poirot watched them all without speaking. Lady Beatrice was weeping into a small lace handkerchief. Her silk evening gown rustled as she moved, and the scent of expensive perfume followed her through the room. Julian stood near the fireplace, pale and motionless, while Colonel Vale repeatedly struck a match against the side of his silver cigarette case. Eleanor Vane was trembling so violently that the crystal glass in her hand made a faint, nervous sound. "Observe, mon ami," Poirot murmured to me. "The performance begins immediately. You mean their grief? Mais oui, but grief is not the only thing being performed tonight." He walked toward the desk. The study smelled of furniture wax, cigar smoke, and the bitter medicinal scent that lingered around the dead man's glass. A fire crackled in the marble fireplace, throwing restless shadows across the bookshelves. Rain tapped against the windows in a steady rhythm, while somewhere in the corridor a grandfather clock announced the quarter hour. Poirot examined the desk without touching anything. Sir Reginald's death appeared remarkably tidy. His chair had not been overturned. There was no sign of struggle. His dinner jacket remained immaculate, except for a tiny crease near the left cuff. Beside his hand stood an empty champagne glass, and near the fireplace lay a fragment of blue silk. "An accident?" suggested Colonel Vale. Poirot turned. "Perhaps." The colonel's expression hardened. "You don't believe that?" "I believe nothing yet." Poirot bent toward the silk. "Interesting." Lady Beatrice stopped crying. It was only for a second, but Poirot noticed. "The mask slips," he whispered. She quickly raised her handkerchief again. Poirot straightened. "Madame," This silk, it belongs to you? Lady Beatrice looked down at her gown. No, the answer came too quickly. Poirot smiled. Bravo. But the performance, it is not convincing. She stared at him. Julian suddenly stepped forward. You cannot seriously suspect my aunt because of a piece of cloth. I suspect nobody. Then what are you doing? Directing. The young man frowned. Poirot's green eyes gleamed. You see, Monsieur Blackthorne, this house is tonight a theatre. Your uncle has left the stage, but the actors remain. Each has a role, each has a mask, and sooner or later, one of them will forget the lines. Nobody spoke. The fire popped loudly. Poirot turned toward the door. Until then, we observe. And so the first scene began. The cast was an unusual one. Sir Reginald Blackthorne had been wealthy, powerful, and thoroughly disliked. He owned several properties, a publishing company, and a collection of rare books worth a fortune. At 62, he had married Lady Beatrice, 31 years his junior, after the death of his first wife. His nephew Julian had been raised in the house, but had recently accumulated serious gambling debts. Colonel Vale, an old friend of Sir Reginald's, had lost money in one of the Blackthorne investments. Eleanor Vane had worked as Sir Reginald's secretary for 7 years and was believed to know nearly every secret connected with his business affairs. Dr. Bell had treated Sir Reginald for a heart condition, and Clara Finch, the housekeeper, had served the family for 24 years. Every actor in this drama has a secret, Poirot told me quietly. The question is not whether they have secrets. The question is which secret has murdered a man. He looked again toward Lady Beatrice. She was now sitting beside the fire, apparently composed. Too composed. You see her? Yes. She plays the widow. Do you think she killed him? Poirot gave me an offended look. Mon ami, I do not ask who killed the victim until I have asked why the victim needed to die. He tapped his forehead. Order and method. Then he looked at the assembled household. The stage was set. The players had assembled. Let the drama begin. Chapter 2. Enter the players. Morning came beneath a grey sky. Blackthorne Hall looked entirely different in daylight. The previous night's glamour had vanished, leaving only cold marble, dark wood, and the faint smell of stale champagne. The velvet curtains in the drawing room remained closed, and pale winter light entered through the tall windows like an unwanted spectator. Poirot requested that everyone remain in the house. The formal interviews began at 10. The interviews, he explained, are our scenes. Each actor will be given the opportunity to perform. Our first performer was Lady Beatrice. She entered the library wearing a dark wool dress and carrying the same lace handkerchief. Poirot indicated the chair. Please, she sat. You discovered nothing unusual about your husband last night? No. Nothing? He seemed perfectly well. At dinner? Yes. You spoke with him afterward? No. Poirot leaned back. Yet you were seen entering the corridor outside his study at 10:20. Her eyes narrowed. Who told you that? Ah, Poirot smiled. You ask the identity of the witness before you deny the event. That is interesting. Lady Beatrice looked away. I went to fetch a book. From where? The library. Which book? She hesitated. I don't remember. Then perhaps you did not go for a book. Her face tightened. You think I murdered my husband. I think you are performing indignation. She rose abruptly. I will not be insulted. Poirot remained seated. Please sit down, Lady Beatrice. She did. The mask had slipped, only slightly, but Poirot had seen it. Julian was different. He attempted charm. He smiled too often, laughed at inappropriate moments, and continually ran a hand through his hair. I loved Uncle Reginald, he said. Poirot looked at him. You owed him £12,000. Julian stopped smiling. That is not the same thing. No? No. Your uncle intended to cut you from his will. I didn't know that. Did you know he had changed his will? Silence. Poirot watched him. Julian's right hand tightened around his left wrist. Fear, not grief. You knew, said Poirot. Julian looked toward the window. Yes. How? He told me. And when? Yesterday afternoon. Poirot nodded. Thank you. That's all? For now. Julian rose. Poirot waited until the door closed. Observe, mon ami. Fear performing confidence. Colonel Vale was interviewed next. He was a broad man with a military bearing, rough tweed jacket, and a silver watch chain. He smelled faintly of tobacco and sandalwood cologne. You quarreled with Sir Reginald yesterday. We disagreed. About money? Yes. You threatened him? Certainly not. You said, you will regret this. The colonel's jaw tightened. I was angry. Anger is not murder. No. But it makes a useful costume for someone who wishes to appear guilty. The colonel stared. Poirot smiled. Bravo. You understand the theatre. Eleanor Vane was the most difficult. She appeared fragile. Her hands trembled. Her voice was soft. Her eyes remained lowered. You were Sir Reginald's secretary for 7 years? Yes. You knew his affairs. Some. His will? She swallowed. Yes. Did you know he intended to dismiss you? Her face went white. No. Poirot leaned forward. Then why are you frightened? She looked up. For the first time, her eyes met his. I am frightened because someone in this house is lying. Poirot smiled. Ah, what? Nothing. He looked at me. That is the first honest sentence we have heard. The final interview was with Clara Finch. She was calm, almost unnaturally so. You found nothing unusual? No, sir. Who served champagne? I did. Who poured Sir Reginald's glass? Lady Beatrice. Lady Beatrice, waiting outside the library, suddenly turned. Poirot noticed. At what time? About 10:45. Was Sir Reginald alone? Yes. How do you know? Because I saw Lady Beatrice leave the corridor. Poirot's eyes sharpened. Ah. Clara's face remained expressionless. From where? The study. A silence followed. Poirot stood. Thank you, Mrs. Finch. When she had gone, he turned to me. We have our first missed cue. Lady Beatrice said she never entered the study. Exactly. So she lied. Perhaps. He touched his moustache thoughtfully. Or perhaps Mrs. Finch performed her own little scene. He glanced toward the closed door. The players have entered. But who performs truth, and who performs lies? Chapter 3. The First Act. By afternoon, Blackthorn Hall had become a different kind of theatre. The police had searched the house. Nothing decisive had been found. The champagne bottle contained no poison, the remaining glasses were clean, and the study door had been locked when the body was discovered. Yet Poirot remained strangely cheerful. Why are you smiling? I asked. Because, Hastings, the actors become nervous when the audience stops believing them. We stood in the conservatory. The room smelled of damp earth, hothouse roses, and strong continental coffee. Beyond the glass, rain fell upon the winter garden. Somewhere in the house, a piano played 3 uncertain notes before falling silent. Poirot suddenly turned. Eleanor Vane. She was standing in the doorway. I need to speak with you. She entered. Poirot pointed to a chair. You lied yesterday. Her face drained of color. About what? Your relationship with Sir Reginald. She looked at me, then at Poirot. I did not. You said you feared someone in this house. Yes. Why? She hesitated. Because Sir Reginald told me he believed someone was stealing from him. Poirot's expression changed. Who? I don't know. You knew. No. Miss Vane. His voice softened. Your performance is not convincing. Her hands stopped trembling. That was the tell. The trembling had been deliberate. Now that she was genuinely frightened, her hands became still. Poirot saw it. The mask slips, he said quietly. She closed her eyes. Sir Reginald was investigating Colonel Vale. Why? He discovered payments being made from the company accounts. To whom? I don't know. Do you have proof? She reached into her handbag. A folded letter appeared. I found this in Sir Reginald's desk. Poirot took it. The paper contained a series of payments. Names were absent. Only initials. CV. Poirot's expression remained unreadable. Why did you hide this? I was afraid. Of Colonel Vale. She shook her head. Of Sir Reginald. That answer surprised me. Why? Because he knew I had altered one of his letters. Poirot looked at her. Ah, the first mask had cracked. Human beings, Poirot later told me, rarely lie merely because they wish to deceive. More often, they lie because the truth demands a role they are unwilling to play. A frightened woman becomes brave. A jealous man becomes indifferent. A guilty person becomes excessively helpful. And someone who is devastated may sometimes smile because the mind has not yet accepted what the heart has suffered. The mask, Poirot explained, is not always created for others. Sometimes we create it for ourselves. He reminded me of a case from years before, when a seemingly innocent witness had spent hours describing a murder with extraordinary precision. Every detail appeared authentic. Every gesture had been appropriate. The witness trembled at the correct moments, lowered his voice when mentioning the victim, and even became tearful when describing the final discovery. Yet Poirot noticed something peculiar. Whenever the witness reached the emotional portion of his story, he looked toward the door rather than toward the person to whom he was speaking. His body was preparing to escape before his mind had admitted that he was afraid. The story had been rehearsed, but the instinct had not. That was the lesson of the case. The face can lie. The voice can lie. Even tears can lie. But the body often reveals what the performer has forgotten to rehearse. So watch carefully, Poirot told me. Not the dramatic gesture, the tiny movement that comes before it. He looked toward Blackthorn Hall. Every house has its theatre. Every family has its roles. And sometimes the most dangerous actor is the one who has played the same character for so long that even he believes the costume is his skin. Then the grandfather clock chimed. Poirot stood. The first act concluded. Some masks had cracked. Chapter 4. Rehearsed Lines. Poirot began testing alibis. He did not accuse anyone. That would have been too simple. Instead, he rearranged the scenes. At breakfast, he asked Julian what time he had left the drawing room. 10:30. Lady Beatrice said 10:40. Colonel Vale said 10:25. Eleanor said 10:35. Clara Finch said 10:20. 5 witnesses. 5 different performances. Poirot smiled. Truth, he said, does not always remember the clock, but lies frequently remember it too well. He summoned them one by one. Julian changed his answer. Lady Beatrice changed hers. Colonel Vale became angry. Eleanor began crying. Clara did not change hers at all. That worried Poirot more than the contradictions. She is too consistent, he told me. Because she is telling the truth? Perhaps. Or because she rehearsed. That evening, Poirot gathered everyone in the drawing room. The velvet curtains were finally opened. Rain had stopped, leaving the terrace silver beneath the moon. The fire gave off a warm glow, and crystal glasses stood untouched on the table. Poirot walked slowly among them. Let us discuss the champagne. Everyone became silent. The poison was not in the bottle. Dr. Bell looked up. It was not? No. Then where? Poirot smiled. That is the question. He turned toward Lady Beatrice. You poured Sir Reginald's champagne. Yes. Yet the glass contained traces of a bitter substance. She stared. I did not poison him. I did not say you did. You implied it. Ah, the actor anticipates the accusation. She stood. Poirot's voice sharpened. Sit down. She obeyed. The mask had begun to strain. Dr. Bell finally confessed something. He had supplied Sir Reginald with medicine that morning. A sleeping draught. Why? He could not sleep. Did he take it? I don't know. Poirot's eyes narrowed. What exactly did you give him? Chloral hydrate. The room changed. Colonel Vale swore. Eleanor covered her mouth. Poirot raised one finger. Do not become excited. The quantity was harmless. Then what killed him? Poirot looked toward the fireplace. That is what we are going to discover. He walked to the mantel. There was a small bronze theatre mask resting beside a clock. He picked it up. Who placed this here? Nobody answered. Poirot smiled. Interesting. The investigation had moved backstage. Chapter 5. The Mask Slips. The confrontation came after midnight. Poirot found Lady Beatrice alone in the conservatory. She stood beside the glass doors, wrapped in a velvet robe. Moonlight fell across her face, and the cold panes were silver with condensation. You wanted to see me? Yes. Why? Because your husband did not die at 11. She froze. Poirot continued. He died earlier. No. The champagne was theatre. She said nothing. You knew he was already dying when you screamed. Her face changed. For the first time, the carefully constructed expression disappeared. What do you want? The truth. I have told you the truth. No. Poirot stepped closer. Your husband had a heart condition. Someone gave him a substance that accelerated it. The champagne was then used to create the appearance of poisoning. Lady Beatrice's lips trembled. You cannot prove it. I do not need to prove it yet. Then why accuse me? Because you have been performing grief. Her composure shattered. I hated him. The words came like a cry. Poirot waited. Lady Beatrice began to weep. This time there was no handkerchief, no graceful posture, no theatrical restraint. Only a woman bent by exhaustion. He destroyed my life, she whispered. How? He promised to divorce me. Then he changed his mind. Why? He was leaving everything to someone else. Who? She looked toward him. Eleanor. Poirot's expression changed. Miss Vane? Lady Beatrice nodded. She was his daughter. The revelation struck like a bell. Eleanor Vane was not merely the secretary. She was Sir Reginald's illegitimate daughter, and the new will left her everything. Lady Beatrice sank into a chair. I knew. Sir Reginald told me yesterday. Why did you not reveal this? Because I thought everyone would believe I killed him. Poirot's voice softened. Did you? No. She looked directly into his eyes. I wanted him dead. Poirot nodded. That is not the same thing. The true clue came from her sleeve. Poirot had noticed the blue silk. It was not from her dress. It was from the lining of an old theatre costume stored in the attic. A costume used by Eleanor years earlier when the household had staged a charity play. The blue silk had been torn recently, and Eleanor had been the one who repaired it. The mask was falling, but not yet completely. Chapter 6. Behind the Curtain. Eleanor confessed the rest. Her mother had been Sir Reginald's lover 30 years earlier. When she became pregnant, Sir Reginald paid her to disappear. Eleanor had been raised believing her father was dead. She discovered the truth only 6 months before. Sir Reginald had found her through an old photograph. I hated him, she said. Poirot watched her. But you also wanted his recognition. Yes. Love and hate. Yes. 2 masks for 1 face. She looked down. He promised me everything.
And then?
He changed his will.
To whom?
She looked up. To a charitable foundation. Poirot was silent. Suddenly, the motive became more complicated. Eleanor would inherit nothing. Lady Beatrice would inherit little. Julian would inherit almost nothing. Colonel Vale was in debt. Dr. Bell knew the victim's medical condition. Everyone had motive, but only one had opportunity. The backstage of human relationships is rarely beautiful. In public, people arrange themselves carefully, husband and wife, friend and friend, employer and employee, respectable gentleman and loyal servant. Behind the curtain, however, those roles become tangled with resentment, dependency, envy, fear, and old wounds. Poirot believed that murder often occurred when a private emotion became stronger than a public role. He remembered another affair in which a devoted wife had appeared utterly broken by her husband's death. Yet she had spent years resenting him. Her grief was real, but so was her relief. That contradiction had confused everyone, except Poirot. Human beings, he explained, can experience 2 opposite emotions simultaneously. The mistake is believing that one cancels the other. People are not actors because they are false, he told me. They are actors because society requires them to behave. The grieving widow must grieve. The loyal friend must defend. The dutiful son must mourn. The faithful servant must remain silent. But eventually, the role becomes too heavy. A hand trembles. A sentence arrives too quickly. A person knows something before they should know it. The mask slips. That is where truth lives. And so Poirot returned to the study. He stood before the desk. He examined the champagne glass, then the medicine bottle, then the torn silk. Finally, he looked at the bronze theatre mask on the mantel. One of these objects, he said, is not evidence. Which? All of them. I stared at him. He smiled. They are props. Chapter 7. The Final Act. That evening, Poirot assembled the cast. The drawing room was illuminated by every chandelier. The fire burned brightly. Rain had returned, tapping against the windows like impatient fingers. Everyone stood in silence. Poirot walked to the center. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, you have each performed for Hercule Poirot, some truthfully, some not. He paused. Let us review the performances. He turned to Lady Beatrice. You played the grieving widow, but your grief was complicated by hatred. You wished your husband dead, but you did not kill him. Lady Beatrice closed her eyes. Poirot turned to Julian. You played the frightened nephew. Your debts gave you motive, but your greatest fear was not imprisonment. It was discovering that your uncle had deliberately excluded you from his will. Julian lowered his head. Colonel Vale, Poirot continued, you played the angry friend. You lied about your financial dealings, but your lie concealed fraud, not murder. The colonel said nothing. Dr. Bell, you played the loyal physician. Your medicine contributed to the appearance of natural death, but not intentionally. Then Poirot turned toward Eleanor. You played the innocent secretary. She stared at him. But innocent secretaries do not know that the victim has died before anyone tells them. Her face went white. Poirot's voice became gentle. You knew at 10:50. I did not. You did. How? Because when the body was discovered, you said, he is dead. Eleanor began shaking. You had not yet seen him. Silence. Poirot stepped closer. You killed him. No. The poison was not in the champagne. It was on the rim of the glass, applied earlier. But that alone did not kill him. Sir Reginald had already taken the medicine Dr. Bell prescribed. You knew that. Eleanor stared. You altered the medicine. She said nothing. You increase the dosage. No. Poirot's eyes hardened. Then let us discuss the blue silk. He held up the torn fragment. You used the old theater costume to protect your hand while applying the substance. You burned the rest. Eleanor's composure finally broke. I didn't mean for him to suffer. Poirot said nothing. He was going to destroy me again. Yes, he said I was nothing. Poirot's voice was quiet. So you decided to become the author of your own final scene. She began to cry. The glass, she whispered. I touched it. Yes. I thought no one would notice. Someone did. She looked up. Who? Poirot touched his moustache. Yourself. She stared. When the body was found, you looked at the glass before you looked at Sir Reginald. That was the moment your mask slipped. The room became utterly silent. Poirot turned toward us all. The performance is over. He looked at Eleanor. The truth. She takes her bow. Chapter 8. Curtain Call. The door closed behind Eleanor Vane with a quiet click. For several seconds nobody moved. The drawing room, which only an hour earlier had been a stage crowded with accusation and revelation, now seemed almost painfully ordinary. The fire had burned low in the marble grate, sending occasional sparks upward. A grandfather clock ticked from the corner, each measured sound filling the silence left by the departing police. On the long table, crystal glasses stood untouched beside a silver tray of coffee that had grown cold. Poirot remained in the center of the room. He did not look triumphant. There was no smile upon his face, no theatrical gesture of victory. His small figure seemed almost diminished beneath the enormous Art Deco chandelier, as though the director had suddenly become merely another man, standing in an empty theater after the audience had gone. Lady Beatrice was the first to speak. Is it over? Poirot looked at her. Yes, madame. She glanced toward the closed door. She killed him. Yes. And she will go to prison, most probably. Lady Beatrice lowered herself slowly into a chair. For the first time since Poirot had arrived at Blackthorn Hall, she removed the lace handkerchief from her hand and placed it on the table. She did not need it anymore. The performance was over. Colonel Vale remained standing near the fireplace. He looked older now. The anger that had once given him an imposing presence had disappeared, leaving behind a tired man with rough grey hair and a deeply lined face. He stared into the fire, where one last log collapsed upon itself with a soft crackle. I suppose you will tell them about me too, he said. Poirot turned. About what? The accounts. Lady Beatrice looked up. Colonel Vale gave a bitter laugh. I falsified figures. Sir Reginald discovered it. I was desperate. Julian stared at him. You stole from him. Yes? How much? Enough. Poirot raised one hand. Colonel, your financial crime is a matter for the police, but it is important that you understand something. Vale looked at him. You were not the murderer. I know. No, you do not know. Poirot's voice was gentle. You have spent the last 24 hours performing the role of a guilty man. You believed that because you had something to hide, you must therefore be guilty of everything. Vale looked away. That is how fear behaves. Poirot paused. Fear is an excellent actor. The colonel gave a faint smile. And guilt? Guilt is worse. Why? Because guilt eventually forgets the script. Julian had heard every word. He was standing beside the tall windows, his hands buried in his pockets. The moon had emerged between the clouds, casting pale light across the terrace and the bare winter trees beyond it. I suppose I am finished here, he said. Lady Beatrice looked at him. What do you mean? My uncle is dead. Eleanor will be imprisoned. You are selling the house. There is nothing left for me. Poirot studied him. Perhaps that is not the tragedy you believe it to be. Julian frowned. What do you mean? You were performing the role of heir. I was the heir. Exactly. And because you believed you had inherited a role, you believed you had inherited a destiny. Julian was silent. Poirot walked toward him. Your uncle's death does not require you to become the man he expected you to be. The young man's expression changed. For a moment, the charming confidence disappeared. He looked frightened, not of the police, not of prison, of the future. Poirot saw it. Ah, he said softly. What? The mask. Julian gave a weak laugh. I have worn it for years. Then perhaps it is time to remove it. Lady Beatrice rose. She walked toward the fireplace and stared at the dying flames. Do you know what is strange? She said. Poirot waited. I spent years imagining what I would feel when Reginald died. Her voice was quiet. I imagined relief. She looked toward the door through which Eleanor had disappeared. But I feel nothing. Poirot nodded. That is sometimes the truth. She turned to him. I hated him. Yes. I wanted him to suffer. Yes. I even wished that he would die. Poirot did not contradict her. But wishing, he said, is not doing. Lady Beatrice closed her eyes. I know. There was no shame in her voice now. No elegant indignation. No cultivated grief. Only honesty. And somehow that honesty was more painful than all her earlier tears. Poirot looked at her for a long moment. You have spent a great deal of time performing the role of Lady Beatrice Blackthorne. She gave a faint smile, and who am I without it? That, said Poirot, is for you to discover. A servant entered quietly. Mr. Poirot? Yes? The police have finished in the study. Poirot nodded. Thank you. The servant hesitated. Would you like anything before they leave? Poirot glanced toward the side table. Coffee. At this hour? Mon Dieu. After such a performance, certainly. The servant smiled and disappeared. Soon the rich smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the room. Poirot accepted the cup, but did not drink immediately. He held it between his small hands, enjoying the warmth. Funny, I said. After everything that happened, the house seems almost peaceful. Poirot looked around. Because the actors have stopped performing. He gestured toward the drawing room. Look at them. I did. Lady Beatrice sat quietly. Julian stared at the window. Colonel Vale stood without his usual military stiffness. No one was pretending anymore. The house itself seemed to have relaxed. The polished mahogany furniture remained elegant. The velvet curtains still framed the windows. The crystal chandelier still reflected the firelight. Yet the room no longer felt luxurious. It felt honest. And honesty, I thought, was a strangely austere decoration. Later that night, Poirot returned to the study. I followed him. The police had removed the body, but the room retained traces of the murder. The chair remained beside the desk. The champagne glass had been taken away. A faint scent of cigar smoke lingered in the air. Poirot stood beneath the velvet curtains. This was the stage, he said. Yes, and now the stage is empty. He smiled. Not entirely. He walked toward the desk and examined the place where Sir Reginald had once sat. Every murder leaves something behind. A clue? Not always. He looked at me. Sometimes it leaves a question. What question does this one leave? Poirot's expression became thoughtful. How many of us live behind masks? I considered that. Everyone? Perhaps. He moved to the window. The murderer wore the mask of the innocent secretary. Lady Beatrice wore the mask of the grieving wife. Julian wore the mask of the confident heir. Colonel Vale wore the mask of the angry soldier. And you? Poirot looked at me. I? Yes. He smiled. Ah, Hastings. Hercule Poirot wears no mask. I laughed. He immediately lifted one eyebrow. Well, what? Perhaps one. He touched his magnificent moustache. The moustache is magnificent enough to be considered a costume. I laughed again. For the first time that night, Poirot smiled genuinely. We left the study. As we crossed the corridor, Clara Finch appeared. She was carrying a small tray of linen. "Mr. Poirot." "Yes, Mrs. Finch?" She hesitated. "I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For believing me." Poirot looked puzzled. "You told the truth. Most people did not believe me." "Why?" "Because I am only the housekeeper." Poirot's expression softened. "Ah." He looked down the corridor. "That is another performance society teaches us." She waited. "Some people are placed in the background," he said. "They become scenery. Others are placed in the spotlight. But scenery sees everything." Clara smiled. "I saw more than I told the police." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "What did you see?" She looked toward the study. Sir Reginald was frightened that evening. "Frightened?" "Yes." "Of what?" "I don't know." She lowered her voice. "But before dinner, he told me something." "What?" he said. "Clara, by tomorrow, this house will change forever." Poirot became still. "Did he say why?" "No." Poirot nodded slowly. "Thank you." She left. I looked at him. "Does that change anything?" "No." "Then why are you interested?" "Because truth does not stop being interesting merely because the murderer has been found." At 3 a.m, Blackthorn Hall finally became silent. The police had gone, the servants had retired, the guests remained in their rooms. Only the grandfather clock continued its patient watch. Poirot and I sat in the drawing room. The fire had almost disappeared. Poirot's coffee was untouched. "You know," I said, "I expected you to be pleased." "Pleased?" "After solving the case." He looked at me. "Why should I be pleased?" "You caught the murderer." "Yes? That is not enough?" "It is necessary." He paused. "But not enough." Poirot looked toward the curtains. "A murder is not a puzzle merely because someone has died. It is a human catastrophe. To solve it is to explain how one person crossed a line from thought to action." He shook his head. "And often, the line is very thin." I thought of Eleanor, a frightened young woman, a hidden daughter, a lifetime of resentment, one decision, one poisoned glass, one dead man, one ruined life. Could she have stopped herself? I asked. Yes. Why didn't she? Because she convinced herself that she had no choice. Poirot's voice became quiet. That is one of the most dangerous lies a human being can tell. Dawn began to lighten the windows. Blackthorn Hall changed color. The cold marble became silver. The velvet curtains softened from black to dark blue. The chandelier no longer seemed grand, only tired. Lady Beatrice appeared at the doorway. She was wearing a simple morning robe. No jewels, no perfume, no elaborate hairstyle. Without the costume of Lady Beatrice Blackthorn, she looked younger. "Mr. Poirot?" "Yes?" "I wanted to say goodbye." Poirot stood. She approached. "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me." He looked at her carefully. "I saw the performance." She smiled. "And now? Now I see the woman." Lady Beatrice's eyes filled with tears. This time she did not hide them. She simply allowed them to fall. Poirot did not offer the handkerchief. He understood that some tears should not be interrupted. She nodded and walked away. Poirot watched her disappear. Then he sat down again. "That," he said softly, "was genuine." The sun finally rose. The stage was empty. The velvet curtains remained open. The crystal chandelier caught the first pale light of morning, scattering small reflections across the polished floor. Somewhere in the kitchen, servants began preparing breakfast, and the smell of fresh coffee slowly replaced the stale perfume of the previous evening. Blackthorn Hall was becoming a house again, not a crime scene, not a theatre, a house. And perhaps that was the strangest transformation of all. A place where people had performed grief, innocence, loyalty, confidence, and fear was now simply a quiet country home, waiting to decide what it would become next. Poirot stood near the entrance. He adjusted his coat. "Ready, Hastings?" "Yes." He looked back one final time. "Do you hear it?" "Hear what?" "The applause." I listened. There was nothing, only the clock. Poirot smiled. No applause for this performance. He opened the door. Only justice. We stepped outside. Behind us, the door closed softly, and for the first time since Sir Reginald Blackthorn's death, nobody inside the house had a role left to play. The curtain call had come. No applause, only justice. Chapter 9. After the show. 3 months had passed since the night the curtain fell at Blackthorn Hall. Winter had loosened its grip on the English countryside, though the mornings were still cold enough to silver the windows and leave a sharp chill upon the stone terraces. Spring had begun quietly, almost apologetically, with small green shoots appearing beneath the bare hedges and the first hothouse roses opening in the conservatory. Blackthorn Hall itself was no longer the house it had been. The police had gone, the servants had changed, the guests had scattered, and the room in which Sir Reginald Blackthorn had died had been locked for nearly 2 weeks before anyone finally had the courage to enter it again. When Poirot and I returned, the great house seemed almost embarrassed by its own silence. The polished mahogany still gleamed, the velvet curtains still framed the tall windows. The crystal chandelier still hung above the drawing room, yet the glamour had gone, the theatre had emptied, and now, with no audience remaining, the stage looked strangely small. "Everything is different," I said. Poirot removed his gloves. "Not everything, Hastings." He looked around. "The furniture remains, the house remains, the people have changed." He was right. The first transformation was Lady Beatrice. She had sold the house. The papers had been signed that morning, and by the end of the week, she intended to leave England for a small villa in the south of France. There would be no grand farewell, no society announcement, no dramatic explanation. She simply wanted to disappear from the life she had once performed. When we found her in the drawing room, she was sitting beside the window with a book in her lap. She wore a simple cream-colored dress. No diamonds, no elaborate hairstyle, no perfume strong enough to announce her presence before she entered a room. She looked peaceful. "Mr. Poirot," she said. "Lady Beatrice." She smiled. "It is good to see you." Poirot bowed. "And you, madame." She looked toward the empty fireplace. "Do you remember how that room looked the night Sir Reginald died?" "Perfectly. So do I." Her voice became quieter. "I thought I would remember it forever." Poirot sat opposite her. "Perhaps you will." She gave a small smile. "But I remember something else now." "What?" "How much I was acting." Poirot said nothing. Lady Beatrice continued. "I spent years pretending to be happy. Then, when Reginald died, I pretended to be devastated. I thought those were 2 different performances." She looked at Poirot. "They were the same one." Poirot nodded. "Yes, I wanted people to believe I loved him. And now, I no longer care what they believe." There was strength in her answer, not the brittle strength of someone defending herself, something quieter, something real. Poirot smiled. "Then you have made progress." She told us that she had received several invitations since the murder. Dinner parties, charity events, letters from old acquaintances. People wanted to know what had happened. People always did. "The curious thing," she said, is that they do not ask whether I am well. What do they ask? What I think of Eleanor. Poirot's expression became serious. And what do you think? Lady Beatrice looked down. I think she destroyed herself before she destroyed anyone else. Poirot studied her. That is an interesting distinction. Is it true? Perhaps. She closed her book. Do you think she regrets it? Poirot's answer came slowly. Regret is not one emotion, madame. It has many faces. What do you mean? A person may regret the act, or the consequences, or being discovered, or the suffering caused, or simply the life they can no longer recover. Lady Beatrice looked toward the garden. And which does Eleanor feel? I believe she is still discovering the answer. Julian had changed too. He had moved to London. The gambling debts had not disappeared, but neither had he. He had begun working at a publishing company owned by one of Sir Reginald's former associates. He started at the bottom, doing clerical work, carrying manuscripts and making deliveries. For a man who had once expected to inherit a fortune, it was a humiliating beginning. For Julian, however, it had become something else. A beginning. When Poirot met him in London several weeks later, Julian was wearing a modest brown suit and carrying a stack of papers. Mr. Poirot, Monsieur Julian. Julian laughed. You can stop calling me Monsieur. I am hardly aristocracy anymore. Poirot raised an eyebrow. Titles and fortunes are not the same thing. I know that now. They walked together through the office. The smell of ink and paper filled the corridors. Typewriters clattered in distant rooms, and clerks moved quickly between desks. It was not elegant like Blackthorn Hall. Julian seemed happier. Do you miss it? Poirot asked. The house? Yes, Julian thought. Sometimes. Why? Because I spent my entire life believing that house was my future. And now? Now I think it was my prison. Poirot smiled. Excellent. Julian looked at him. Excellent. You have learned to distinguish between inheritance and identity. Julian laughed. Is that something you always say? Only when it is true. Before they parted, Julian stopped. Mr. Poirot. Yes? Thank you. For what? You gave me the chance to become someone else. Poirot shook his head. No, Monsieur Julian. You did that yourself. Colonel Vale's transformation was less comfortable. The investigation into his financial crimes had continued. He admitted that he had falsified several accounts in order to cover losses from investments. He had intended to repay the money before Sir Reginald discovered what he had done. He had failed. The consequences were severe. Yet he cooperated with the authorities, and because he had eventually confessed everything, the punishment was less than it might have been. When Poirot received a letter from him, the colonel wrote only one sentence. I have discovered that honor is not the absence of failure, but the courage to admit it. Poirot read the sentence twice. Then he folded the letter. An excellent line, he said. Do you think he means it? Perhaps? Perhaps? Truth is not proved by words, Hastings. We shall see what he does next. Dr. Marcus Bell retired from medical practice. He had carried the knowledge that his prescription had helped create the circumstances surrounding Sir Reginald's death like a stone in his chest. He had not committed a crime, but he believed he had failed morally. Poirot visited him once. The doctor lived in a small house overlooking the sea. The rooms smelled of wood smoke, leather-bound books, and strong coffee. The windows were open despite the cold, allowing the sound of waves to enter the study. I should have recognized what Eleanor intended, Dr. Bell said. You were not responsible for her intentions. No. But I feel responsible for not understanding my patient. Poirot shook his head. Doctor, you are not a detective. Perhaps I should have been. No. Poirot looked toward the sea. The world does not need doctors who suspect everyone. The doctor smiled sadly. and what does it need? Doctors who remember that human beings are complicated. The two men sat quietly for a moment. Then Dr. Bell said, "I suppose that is what the case taught you." Poirot smiled. "Non, doctor. It reminded me." The greatest change, however, belonged to Clara Finch. She had remained at Blackthorn Hall until the sale. For 24 years, she had been part of the background, a servant, a housekeeper, a woman whose presence was so constant that people forgot to notice her. But after the murder, something changed. People had finally listened to her. She had seen the house differently from everyone else. She knew who entered rooms, who left them, who drank too much, who argued, who cried, who lied. When the house was sold, Lady Beatrice offered her a generous settlement. Clara refused to become dependent upon charity. Instead, she opened a small guest house in Devon. "Can you imagine it?" I asked Poirot when he told me. "Perfectly. She has never run a business. Neither had Sir Reginald when he began. Do you think she will succeed?" Poirot smiled. "She knows people." He tapped his temple. "And that is a valuable education." Then there was Eleanor. She remained in prison awaiting trial. Poirot received occasional reports from her solicitor. She had stopped denying the crime. She had admitted everything. But she had also asked one question repeatedly. Why did I become capable of doing it? Poirot considered that question more important than whether she deserved sympathy. "Do you feel sorry for her?" I asked. "That is not the relevant question. What is? Do I understand her? And do you?" Poirot was silent for a long moment. "I understand the path." He looked toward the window. "I do not excuse the destination." That distinction seemed important to him. Eleanor had been hurt. She had been abandoned. She had been humiliated. But suffering did not give her the right to murder. Understanding explained. It did not forgive. One afternoon, Poirot and I returned to Blackthorn Hall for the final time. The sale had been completed. The new owner had not yet moved in. The house stood empty. The drawing room contained only a few pieces of furniture awaiting removal. The curtains had been taken down. Without them, the windows looked strangely naked. Poirot stood in the center of the room. "Do you remember?" I asked. "Of course. The night of the revelation." "Yes." "The accusations." "Yes." "The confession." "Yes." He looked toward the empty wall. "It seems impossible that so much drama occurred here." "Why?" "Because the room is ordinary." Poirot smiled. "That is the secret, Hastings." "What?" "Crime rarely occurs in places that look like crime scenes." He walked toward the window. "It occurs in ordinary rooms, ordinary houses, ordinary families." He turned. "And that is why people are so often surprised." We walked through the rest of the house, the dining room, the library, the conservatory, the study. Each room carried a memory. Here, Julian had lied. There, Lady Beatrice had performed grief. There, Eleanor had hidden the letter. And here, in the study, Sir Reginald had taken his final breath. Poirot entered quietly. He stood beside the desk. The room smelled faintly of old wood and dust. The fireplace was cold. The once polished surface of the desk had been cleared. There was no champagne, no medicine, no torn silk, no evidence, only emptiness. "Do you know what I find most interesting?" Poirot said. "What?" "The objects are gone, naturally. But the psychology remains." He touched the desk. "That is why a murder cannot truly be erased." I looked around. "Do you mean the memory?" "More than that." He turned toward me. "The lesson." As we prepared to leave, Poirot stopped at the entrance. He looked back one final time. For a moment, I imagined all the people who had once stood there: Sir Reginald, Lady Beatrice, Julian, Eleanor, Colonel Vale, Dr. Bell, Clara Finch. Each had entered the house, carrying a roll. Each had left it changed. The elegant widow had discovered honesty. The frightened heir had discovered independence. The disgraced colonel had discovered accountability. The physician had discovered humility. The housekeeper had discovered her own value. And Eleanor had discovered, tragically, what happens when resentment becomes more powerful than conscience. Poirot opened the door. Outside, spring sunlight fell across the gravel drive. The air smelled of damp earth and roses. "Come, Hastings." We stepped outside. I looked back. "Will you ever forget Blackthorn Hall?" Poirot smiled. "Forget?" He shook his head. "No." Then he glanced at me. "But I shall not remember it as a house of murder." "What will you remember it as?" He considered the question. "A theatre." He looked toward the open sky, where every actor eventually discovered that the audience was not watching the costume. He paused. They were watching the face. We walked down the drive. Behind us, Blackthorn Hall stood silent beneath the spring sun. No police, no whispers, no accusations, no frightened footsteps upon the parquet, only birdsong. The stage had disappeared, but its lesson remained. People could change. People could confess. People could begin again. And even after tragedy, life could move forward. Poirot placed his hat upon his head. "Do you know, Hastings, what? The most important thing about solving a murder is not discovering how someone died. What is it? Discovering how the living will continue." I looked back at the house. "And will they?" Poirot smiled. "May we?" He straightened his coat. "Some will rebuild, some will regret. Some will begin again, and some will begin again, and calm, and calm, and calm. Some will begin again, and some will begin again, and some." Followed. Behind us, the great house grew smaller. The road curved between the trees. The morning sun became brighter, and Blackthorn Hall disappeared from view. The theatre had emptied. The lessons remained. Chapter 10. Poirot reviews the performance. Several weeks after our final visit to Blackthorn Hall, I found Hercule Poirot sitting in his apartment beside a small fire, a porcelain cup of tisane resting upon a table arranged with his customary precision. Outside, London was wrapped in a soft evening mist. The lamps along the street glowed like distant stage lights, and the occasional sound of a motorcar passed beneath the windows before fading into the darkness. Inside, the room was warm, quiet, and faintly scented with beeswax, old books, and the delicate perfume of the flowers Poirot had arranged in a small crystal vase. He had been reading the morning newspaper. I had been reading the same page for nearly 10 minutes without understanding a word. At last I lowered it. "You are thinking about Blackthorn Hall." Poirot did not look up. "Mais oui." I thought so. He folded the newspaper carefully. "The case is finished, Hastings, but the human drama is not finished merely because the police have closed their file." He reached for his cup. That is something people often forget. The newspaper contained a small paragraph concerning Eleanor Vane. Her trial had not yet begun. The article described her as the former secretary of Sir Reginald Blackthorn and referred to the sensational circumstances surrounding the murder. There were several lines about her family connection to Sir Reginald, followed by speculation about inheritance, betrayal, and revenge. Poirot disliked the article. "They make it too simple," he said. "The facts are simple enough. The facts, perhaps." He tapped the newspaper. "The psychology? No." He looked at me. "They say she killed a man because she hated him. Was that not the truth? Part of it. And the rest?" Poirot leaned back. "She killed him because she believed she had become invisible." I frowned. "That seems rather abstract." Human beings are abstract creatures, Hastings. We spend our lives constructing identities. He gestured toward the newspaper. She was the abandoned daughter, the invisible secretary, the woman who knew the truth but was never allowed to speak it. He paused. Then, for one brief moment, she was recognized, and then that recognition was taken away. Exactly. Poirot's expression became somber. She had built her entire emotional life around that moment. When Sir Reginald withdrew it, she believed he had not merely rejected her, she believed he had erased her. I nodded slowly. So she murdered him. Yes, that still does not excuse it. No, Poirot's answer was immediate. Understanding is not forgiveness. He raised one finger. This distinction is essential. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. The fire crackled softly. Poirot eventually said, "Do you know what is most fascinating about the Blackthorn affair? The poison? None. The blue silk? None. The false alibis? Again, none." He smiled. "The masks?" I laughed. "You really have not finished with those. Why should I?" He looked almost offended. "The mask is the central object in every human drama." He rose and walked toward the window. People believe they lie because they wish to deceive others. Often, this is not true. Then why do they lie? Because the truth threatens the identity they have constructed. He looked down at the street. Imagine Hastings, a man who has spent 30 years convincing everyone that he is brave. If he becomes frightened, he must hide the fear. A woman who has built her life around being loyal cannot admit resentment. A son who believes he must be strong cannot confess that he is terrified. He turned. So they perform. The role becomes the protection. Yes, and eventually, Poirot smiled sadly, they forget that it is a role. I thought of Lady Beatrice. She had performed the role of devoted wife until even she could no longer distinguish affection from obligation. When Sir Reginald died, her grief had been partly genuine, partly relief, partly anger, and partly fear. No single emotion explained her. That, Poirot believed, was precisely what made her believable. People want motives to be clean, he said. Clean? Yes, they want hatred to look like hatred. Love to look like love. Greed to look like greed. He shook his head. But human beings are not so convenient. He returned to his chair. Love may contain resentment. Hatred may contain longing. Fear may resemble anger. Guilt may resemble generosity. He lifted his cup. And grief may contain relief. I remembered Lady Beatrice's confession. She had hated Sir Reginald. She had wished him dead. Yet when he died, she had wept. That does not make her a liar, Poirot continued. No, not necessarily. Then what does it make her? Human. Poirot became quiet for a moment. Then he began speaking about another case. In the Ackroyd affair, the performance was particularly instructive. His expression sharpened. A person may rehearse words, gestures, expressions, even the timing of a reaction, but there is always something that escapes rehearsal. The body, precisely. He leaned forward. The body does not always obey the script. A truthful person may pause. A liar may answer too quickly. A frightened person may smile. A guilty person may become extraordinarily helpful. Someone who genuinely knows nothing may ask what happened. Someone who already knows may ask something else. What? Something irrelevant. I understood. Because they are trying to control the scene. Exactly. Poirot smiled. The criminal does not merely commit the crime. He must also direct the audience's attention afterward. That was what Eleanor had attempted. She had created a false scene. The champagne, the silk, the appearance of poisoning, the performance of shock. But she had forgotten one thing. The audience was not watching the props. Poirot had been watching her. "The human body," Poirot said, "is a poor actor." I smiled. "But that sounds almost cruel." "It is accurate." He began counting on his fingers. The hand trembles. The eyes look away. The breathing changes. The voice becomes too smooth. The person anticipates a question. The person knows something before they should. He lowered his hand. And there, he touched the table. That is where the truth appears. I thought about how many times we had nearly missed those details. Lady Beatrice had stopped crying for 1 second. Julian had gripped his wrist. Eleanor's trembling had stopped when she became genuinely afraid. Clara Finch had remained too consistent. Colonel Vale had become angry whenever his financial secrets approached the surface. None of those things alone proved murder. Together, however, they created a psychological map. The little grey cells, Poirot said, do not merely collect facts. He smiled. They arrange human behavior. I looked at him. "Do you think people can change?" Poirot considered this seriously. "Some. Only some. Change is difficult." He looked toward the fire. At Blackthorn Hall, Julian changed because his old identity became impossible. He could no longer pretend to be the wealthy heir. He had to become a man without the inheritance he expected. And Lady Beatrice? She changed because she no longer needed to perform a marriage. And Colonel Vale? He changed because his honor could no longer be protected by silence. What about Eleanor? Poirot's face became solemn. She changed too. Even though she murdered someone? Yes. How? She stopped pretending she was innocent. I was silent. That is not redemption, Poirot added. Do not misunderstand me. It is simply the beginning of truth. He folded his hands. The first step toward changing a person is often the removal of the mask. There was another lesson in the case. The setting itself had transformed. At first, Blackthorn Hall had appeared elegant, a perfect country house stage, crystal, silk, mahogany, champagne, flowers, music, a warm fire against the winter cold. But beneath the elegance were resentment, debt, secrecy, and fear. Luxury, Poirot told me, is excellent camouflage. He smiled. The more beautiful the stage, the less people expect blood behind the curtain. I thought of the drawing room, the velvet curtains, the shining crystal, the polished silver, the expensive perfume. Everything had been designed to communicate refinement, yet murder had occurred there. That is another reason people are deceived, Poirot said. We expect danger to look dangerous. Exactly. He pointed toward the window. A peaceful garden does not announce murder. A respectable family does not announce hatred. A beautiful marriage does not announce resentment. He lowered his voice. The appearance of order can hide tremendous disorder. The clock chimed 9. Poirot glanced at it. Time. For bed? None. He stood. Tea. I laughed. You have already had tisane. That was tisane. And now? Tea. He disappeared into the kitchen. I remained beside the fire. His words continued to trouble me. How many roles did ordinary people perform every day? The confident man, the successful woman, the devoted husband, the cheerful friend, the obedient son, the dependable colleague. How many of them were genuine? How many were costumes? Perhaps society itself was a theater. Perhaps we all entered each morning, dressed for our parts. And perhaps the moments when we were alone were the only times we stopped performing. Poirot returned with the tea. You are thinking too deeply. I was thinking about masks. Ah, he poured. Then you are learning. Tell me something, I said. What? If you had not arrived at Blackthorn Hall, Would the truth eventually have come out? Poirot became thoughtful. Eventually? How can you be certain? Because truth is persistent. Always, almost. He stirred his tea. People imagine lies are powerful because they can survive for years. Can they not? They can survive. Poirot looked directly at me. But they cannot remain perfectly still. What does that mean? A lie requires maintenance. He placed the spoon down. Every time the story is repeated, the liar must remember what was said before. Every new question creates another opportunity for contradiction. Every new person creates another risk. He smiled. Truth requires no maintenance. That was perhaps the simplest explanation of the entire investigation. Eleanor had needed props. She needed the silk. She needed the champagne. She needed the false scene. She needed her performance. Truth needed none of those things. It merely waited. Poirot returned to his chair. That is why the theatre metaphor is useful. You really believe that? Completely. The crime scene is the stage. Yes. The suspects are actors. Yes. Their alibis are scripts. Precisely. Their lies are performances. Exactly. And the clues? Poirot smiled. Missed cues. I laughed. And the murderer? The leading performer. And the detective? He straightened. The director. Then what is the audience? Poirot looked at me. The audience is you. Me? Yes, Hastings. He pointed toward me. And anyone listening to the story. His expression became mischievous. They are not passive. No? None. They observe. He leaned closer. They ask themselves, why did she avoid his eyes? Why did he answer so quickly? Why did that person know something before being told? He tapped the table. The careful observer becomes part of the investigation. I thought about that. The listener had begun as an audience member, but by the end, the listener had become an analyst. That transformation was perhaps the most important of all. Poirot had not simply solved a murder, he had taught us how to watch. That, he said, is why I do not wish the audience merely to know who committed the crime. What do you want? I want them to understand why. Why? Because anyone can memorize a solution. He smiled. But understanding human psychology is more valuable. He looked toward the fire. Once you understand why people perform, you become less easily deceived. The evening deepened. The fire had become embers. Poirot sat quietly, apparently lost in thought. Finally he spoke. Truth triumphs over performance for one simple reason. What reason? Truth does not become tired. I looked at him. Explain. A lie must be protected. A lie must be repeated. A lie must be adjusted. A lie must be remembered. He smiled. But truth simply exists. Outside, the rain began, softly at first, then steadily. It tapped against the windows, in a rhythm, almost like applause. Poirot looked toward the sound. The theatre of crime is never truly closed. Because there will always be another murder? Perhaps. He shook his head. Because there will always be another performance. He stood and adjusted his jacket. Somewhere tonight, someone is pretending to be happy. He walked toward the window. Someone is pretending not to be afraid. He paused. Someone is pretending to forgive. Another pause. Someone is pretending to love. He turned toward me. And someone is pretending to be innocent. His green eyes gleamed. But remember this, Hastings. He touched his mustache with quiet satisfaction. The mask can be perfect. He smiled. The performance can be magnificent. He raised one finger. But eventually, he paused. The actor forgets the lines. The next morning, Poirot and I left London by train. The carriage was warm, the seats upholstered in dark velvet, and the windows blurred with the grey landscape rushing past. A steward brought coffee, and Poirot arranged the sugar packets into a perfect line before beginning his breakfast. I watched him. Still thinking about Blackthorn Hall? He looked at me. Always. Why? Because every case teaches something. And this one? Poirot looked through the window. The lesson is simple. What is it? He smiled. Never trust the costume. The train moved through the countryside. Fields passed. Villages appeared and vanished. The world continued. Blackthorn Hall was behind us. Eleanor's trial would come. Lady Beatrice would begin another life. Julian would build his own. Colonel Vale would live with the consequences of his choices. Dr. Bell would grow old beside the sea. Clara Finch would run her little guest house. And Poirot? He would continue watching, continue listening, continue arranging the fragments of human behavior into patterns. Because somewhere, another stage was already being prepared. Another elegant room, another group of people, another set of masks, another actor rehearsing lines. And somewhere, behind the curtain, truth was waiting patiently. Poirot closed his eyes. I thought he had fallen asleep. Then, without opening them, he said, "Until the next theatre of crime, mes amis." He smiled. Poirot will be watching. The train carried us onward. The curtain fell. The performance ended. But the theatre of human nature remained open. Until the next theatre of crime, mes amis. Poirot watches always.